Let's see if voice is on. Yes, it is. All right. We got the package settled. Hmm. And we are ready to go. Is everyone ready? Let me check if we have a streamer. Looking at the text chat. And it's okay if we don't have a streamer. I just know we're supposed to wait 30 seconds if we do. Okay. There are gifts in front of me. So if you'd like gifts, click on the sign on the left and take a copy of the slides on the right. They auto advance, it's open source, full permission, and you can change them. There we go, and let's get started. Hello, hello. So good to see you. So many wonderful new faces and wonderful friends. Let's see. My inventory is hiding half of my screen and I'm trying to move it out of the way before we get started. My apologies, I'm going to have to close a few messages. So if you messaged me, please write me again in just a few moments, okay? And I'm going to close some of these so I can move my inventory. Picky, right? Okay, well, let's get started. And welcome. Okay, this session takes a lighthearted look at how VWBPE has evolved over the years and the transition I made to teaching in a virtual world. And I hope that my journey has something in common with your journey. Now, if you have to run early, and I know some of you do, I do have a copy of this talk. I always have more to say than what we share here, right? But let's see. Let's see. I can give it to you later. How's that? Just whisper to me and I'll go ahead and start our session. So you will notice I always create one of these memes to describe myself and introduce myself. And I always like to think of myself in terms of how other people see me. Okay? Well, I'm Dr. Cynthia Calongne, but my students call me Dr. C or Lear if they're here in World. And it's just the way I think about life. Now, that first slide, let me go back for just a moment. This is a scene from Tammy. How many of you ever saw any of the Tammy movies? Tammy and the Doctor, Tammy in Love. I'm really dating myself. This is so 1960s. I saw them as reruns, okay? But that's it, Debbie Reynolds. That's right. All these values, this notion of someone who's homespun and good-hearted, you know, we have our next simulation is devoted to Tammy and to the notion of the value of people who make us feel great, who care, and who matter, who give us strength. So we're thinking of not, I don't think of that as an unlikely hero by any means. I think of that as the people who keep us strong, right? And I want to be one of them. So let me go ahead. Let's see. the you will see all these different views of me, but essentially it's the fact that I love science fiction, I love games, I love dancing, I love all the things that are part of the rich culture that exist either in virtual worlds or in online role-playing games. And yet, what I do is I teach that bottom image, and look at my students. My students are rarely humanoid, okay? I have robots, I have light bulbs, I have dragons, I have Navi. When they are humanoid, they're often from different cultures, right? And it's because inside them, there's some spark of imagination and life that really inflames the senses and gets them moving, and they get so excited, it becomes their world. So that's part of this transition that I want to share with you. Well, I took the bottom photo last night from the volunteers group. So I don't know how many of you saw it, and maybe some of you missed it who are volunteering or presenting. And of course, we always want you to feel included. Everyone looks amazing. They're all in their camping gear and looking like they all belong. And then there's me and a couple of others, right? You can tell that we stand out. Oh, yeah. And at the top here, I'm with my virtual harmony team and Yubit Umarov, the core developer of OpenSim, the software we use, which is like Second Life, except it has a few differences. And of course, we use the Firestorm viewer to access it, just as I'm using it right here to be at the conference. Well, I teach a lot of classes. How many of you teach in a virtual world? Give me a yes or no in the text chat. How many of you teach? Now, it doesn't have to be for a university. It could be you have workshops, you share things, you do it through your museum outreach. I see many of you really, okay, Katie, now the question is we're going to have to figure out how to help you transition into this amazing space where you share ideas and teach. You don't have to be a formal educator. That's the good news. You can be someone who's just sharing what you know and making the world an amazing place. Tutoring is perfect because that has a certain intimacy of the mind, right? Where you're helping people who may not understand or they need to demystify complexity. They're like, how does this work, right? Well, of course, I'm not good at thumping this speakeasy, so let me just share a copy of it real quickly with all of you. That way, you can look in case I forget, and that way we will transition together into this talk, right? So let's see. I called it. There we go. Let me make sure this is the right one. So you have the good stuff. Yeah, there we go. And I'm just going to give it to you. It has a very brief name. It's Lear VWBPE. And when I use it in a speakeasy, like I am right now, I rename it to Speak Me. But you're getting the version I created. Here you go. And I shared it with everyone nearby me. So if you don't want it, it's okay. I won't mind. Okay, so now the burden, well, I'll continue to thump it because we love to have a record of what we're talking about. Let's face it, I'm not a very scripted individual. I am a storyteller. And you'll notice from the classes I teach a lot of doctoral class subjects. I have taught over 70 different classes and course subjects for about 4 or 5 different degree programs and disciplines. And I've taught at in virtual worlds. Okay. Some of them didn't mean to be in virtual worlds. Okay. I just kind of went for it. Okay, so I better slow down. Let's go to the next slide. And here's my transition main slide. This is the main thrust of this talk. And when I first named it, I called it andragogy and hudagogy. And I knew people were going to go, huh? What? What do you mean? Well, I'm not a pro when it comes to teaching. I've taught for 29 years. You're welcome, Max. But I'm someone who's curious. I'm a scientist. I'm a software engineer. I'm a mad scientist, okay? I've got that mad scientist spirit, that need to know. I teach through tacit epistemology, which means I like to demystify complexity and say, express ideas in such a way that Tammy understands me. Anyone from any walk of life understands me. When I worked with 13-year-old students, 800 of them, for the Ramapo project, they understood me. When I worked with the special education students as well as the gifted and talented, they understood me. I think that's a powerful thought because it's really hard in my field to be understood because we deal with a lot of concepts that are not very easy to understand. Like the deep probing questions within AI, for example. Well, notice pedagogy is teacher centric. And I guess I better keep through thumping here, right? And that means that teachers construct the lessons, they teach the lessons, they are the fount of knowledge. They will direct students to learning materials and activities, but they're grading it, and students need to conform to certain scripted behavior, right? They have to reach that destination that we've pre-planned, okay? And they're memorizing, which is important in mathematics and science and in medicine. I keep telling the students that I teach are getting a doctor of chiropractic degree. I say, in your medical field, we want you to know and remember all those parts. But in computer science, it's okay if you forget where Microsoft Office put a command. Life doesn't stop. So knowing when memorization of basic facts and rules is important is part of the secret sauce here, right? But my style tends to wander between andragogy and hudagogy. Now, how do I know how to pronounce hudagogy? Well, I gave you a link. You see that link there on the screen? Yeah. There's this wonderful site that I go to. It's called How Just Say, and it's phonetic, right? So I don't have to remember the link. I just have to remember just howjsay.com. And then I ask for whatever obscure terminology I want to hear in a male or female's voice, and they will pronounce it for me. This is very nice because I dislike going to conferences and saying the wrong thing and having everyone giggle when it's not funny. I love laughter, don't get me wrong, but we normally don't want us to be the source of inappropriate laughter. So adults learn through trial and error. You know what that means? That means people aren't reading the book before they get to class. That means they're not, if they're installing software, they're not reading the manual before they install it. They try things out. They see if it supports their behavior, and if it doesn't, then they go find information or find a totally new tool or go to a different class or say, this program's no longer for me, right? Is that it? Yeah, and please talk in the chat. I love the feedback and the questions. Failure is a part of the learning process. Oh, Phil, you're so good. And by the way, a shout out to the Science Circle and that amazing team over there. Um, I'm a member of them, but I'm a bad member because I'm always busy, right? Um, and what Phil's getting to here is this notion of game-based learning. Game-based learning is failure-based learning. If you want to think of an analogy of what we're talking about, games are not about winning. Did you know that? They're about learning to overcome failure, which leads to a winning, solution. That would be nice. But it's if you always won at a game, it would not be very much fun, right? So there needs to be a struggle. We're going to get to that. You're so good, Phil. It's like I paid you money or something to set me up. But I better finish Hudagogy before I move on, right? So we'll get back to that, Phil, that failure-based learning, because we have a couple slides ahead. We weave that in. But Hudagogy, I love that term, and I was introduced to it by a doctoral student at a totally different school um, who wasn't in virtual worlds but should have been, right? Who was very visual and very kinesthetic and very experiential. Experiences mattered, and we had to have them. And he explained to me the hudagogy is how doctoral students learn. That's one of our end goals for a doctoral student. We just don't tell them. We want them to learn to be self-determined. They construct knowledge, and they choose to do so. We don't have to give them assignments. They will choose to continue to do work. Now, I have to keep telling my students, you are writing for yourself. you're not writing for me. I know I'm the person who reads it and grades it and writes feedback and says, hey, use APA style, right? Evidence-based research. But you're writing for you, for your future. Everything you do is for you. And we want you to be this amazing person who's so inquisitive and so demanding, and to learn how to do it fast so you can get back to life. That's my goal because we're busy people, right? Okay. So let's see. I'm looking at the chat, and I'm also that seventh grade science report on Sigmund Freud. You bet. You know, we learn about others so that we can understand their discoveries, their struggles, how they did it, and the fact that that was a triumph of the spirit, whatever they did, right? Or maybe they failed miserably, and then we learn how can we do better. Whatever it is, there we are. So, a lot of educators don't like the learning pyramid, and so I always feature it because I love um, the marketplace of ideas where truth will emerge. I studied under Marshall McLuhan, and I met Eric McLuhan here in the virtual world. When he came to tell me that the alphabet is dead, we just are too close to recognize it. And I thought, whoa, there's a thought. It's like Latin. Boy, and I created this model, but it's based on the learning pyramid. The reason educators are not fond of it, in their defense, and I'm thinking of the formal ones, the theorists, right? The people who have, really understand this stuff, is because they lost the data related to it. These numbers come from a sample of, let's say, um, young freshmen, and it was what they remember 24 hours later after studying, a wealth of stuff. And these were the numbers, the results of that. Interestingly enough, I've taught for 29 years and I assess everything because assessment's my life, right? uh, yep. And I love the bottom. The warm colors is where I thrive. That's where Cynthia is like a puppy, with her tail wagging, having a really good time teaching and using a method that I call cognitive apprenticeship. It's for teachers and for students, in my opinion, Beth, because everyone learns. When we teach, every time I teach, I learn something because I weave in new examples, new research. I discover that things have changed a little bit or how we think about them has changed. And I got to stay abreast of those changes, right? So I use cognitive apprenticeship. Do you know what that means? I didn't put that on the note card, I don't think. You know, probably not.
Yes.
Okay, I'm still in Hudagadji, so I better keep thumping. Yeah, cognitive apprenticeship. Well, we know the apprenticeship model. That's where you have novices, right? You have journeymen and you have masters, right? Think of it like carpentry, for example, or any kind of craft where someone begins and starts building skill through experimentation and failure, getting back to Phil. And, because we have to not do things well to understand what well looks like, right? To understand the difference and how we're converging on our goals. Um, so let's get to the next one. Here's where cognitive apprenticeship really kind of flourishes in my mind. See the Csikszentmihalyi's flow model. You know, he is a wonderful man, and unfortunately, we lost him a couple years ago. But he used to write my students. They would ask for permission to use his stuff, and he gave them permission to include it in his dissertation, their dissertations, and to conduct some serious research about this in their respective fields. And what's interesting about this is how many of you know Jane McGonigal's research? Give me a yes or no. One of her books was Reality is Broken. Another was Super Better, right? And of course, many of you know that she had a crisis in her life. She had an injury. She had overcome great pain. She's a game designer, Katie, who um, is also someone who thinks about how to optimize life. I have a different version of this talk where I talk about all the positive emotions from games and the negative ones too. And she's an advocate for what Phil would call failure-based learning, but also for overcoming failure, giving strength, becoming the hero, being on fire. So she uses a term called fiero. Let me see if I'm there yet. And fiero is in the flow piece of this model. See it up there in the upper right? And fiero is the notion that you're so on fire that you're rocking. Everything is wonderful and you're so enthused and excited. So here's how this model works. Have you ever taken a class that was very uncomfortable? Yeah, it's fiero. That's it, Beth. And if I keep thumping, it'll eventually pop up. There we go. I'm there on Cheeks and Mahai's one, and I talk about Fiero. But Fiero's this feeling of great engagement. Okay. But if you've ever been in a class where the complexity level was very high, you had no familiarity with the subject, you might be great at math, but now we're in psychology and you're lost. Whatever it is, right? Maybe reading nonverbal language, who knows, right? And when the complexity level is high, which is on the left, you see the left side there? You'll notice what happens. If your skill level is low, see the lower left? Low skill and low challenge is apathy. But if you have low skill and the challenge is mid-level or high, you get worried, you feel anxious, you experience anxiety. You're sure you're going to fail. Well, please realize I'm teaching doctoral students most often, and if the first B they get, they're on academic probation, the second B, and they're dismissed from the program. So anxiety is high, right? They must perform. And then I ask them to come into a virtual world and do things they don't have to do. They never have to meet. They're online, right? Why bother? You have to ask, what do I have to do to get them to transition to the virtual world, come to class when they don't have to, and be synchronous when they're asynchronous? It's like the chips are against me, aren't they? So I have to be fairly engaging and have a reason for them to come. And so my goal is to get them to a state of arousal and flow. That sounds bad, doesn't it? So what I do is I share all this info with them and I say, my goal is to get you to the point where you're so on fire that you're making a difference and changing the world in your field. You're finding contributions and opportunities that are not well investigated and lack evidence, right? And you're putting a new spin or thinking about how can we advance these areas, right? Yep, that's it, Jazz. Continual learning requires continual foolishness. I love that. I have to remember that one. Well, this is going to scare you, but I decided to include one thing on complexity. How many of you know who Will Wright is? Okay, give me a yes or no. No. Oh, how many of you have heard of The Sims? Sim City, Spore? No, wow. These are 3 games that okay, and you have to realize Second Life, wouldn't really be possible if we hadn't thought at some point about Sims and avatars and how we simulate life in certain ways. Yeah, he was the lead designer of it, Katie, and he came to one of my conferences. He gave the keynote. It looks like we're going to the dark side of the force here is what I said in the note card. Because you look at this and your eyes glaze over. You're like, please, what is she doing? But when he gave a talk and it was 195 slides in 45 minutes. Phil, it was like watching a Federal Express commercial go off, right? But it was brilliant. He had so much cool stuff, and then he had this one complex slide, and he breaks it down over a series of other slides. But the important point is he is equating all this complexity to nouns, verbs, and grammar. And he's explaining the relationships. All of these verbs are relationships and action, things that are happening, right? The nouns are what we're doing, as they would be the sources and how they're constructed, and then the what, if you will. And then the paradigms are how we do work, how we do things. And he's included chaos theory there or complexity theory, right? And cybernetics, and lots of areas where you think, well, that all sounds way too complex for what I teach. And yet, he can anchor almost every subject we ever think about to one or more of these areas and is really quite brilliant. And I loved it because it made me think differently about my transition into the virtual world. So let's have some fun and step back, do a little moment in time, and think about it. In 2006, I moved my office into the virtual world. And normally I don't sit on campus for 8 hours a day because my office was in a place that students couldn't enter. It was secure. So I said, why would I want to be in a place where my students can't visit me, right? So I'd go to the library or I'd go to the break room or I'd go to places where students hung out when I was on campus. But in 2007, I transitioned to online. I started in 2001, but in 2007, I went fully online. And in 2005, 2006, I started in virtual worlds. So you notice a certain overlap here, right? And my students are designing interfaces, and some of them look rather crude on the screen, right? But the thought here is that they're thinking and they're rethinking how people behave and what people need and how to design something dramatically different. And at first, it might look very similar, and then they have to figure out how do you make that support people who do not understand how to use technology, whatever walk of life and age group and demographic they come from, right? Whatever language, etc. So I gave a talk at the New Media Consortium, and this is October of 2006. And Pathfinder Lester came. How many of you know who he is? Maybe Pathfinder Linden. He was our education champion until 2010 when the great exodus occurred and the fees all doubled and the education champions were let go from Linden Lab. This is Pathfinder. And he's holding his avatar, Black Mage, that he had made with a 3D printer fabricated, and he's giving the keynote address at my conference. Um, and I'm there giving a talk on what can we learn from Second Life and the World of Warcraft. That sounds like me, doesn't it? Because I'm a gamer and I love bridging all these things. And so I'm talking about that, and I don't realize that he is logged in. I'm in the virtual world. I'm showing slides, and I'm also in the virtual world, and I'm at that construction called the future. Did anyone ever go to Crooked House in the future? Crooked House was by Surface, and it was like the book And There Was a Crooked House, which was a short story, I think, by Robert Heinlein. And it's the notion that when you go inside this house in the virtual world, it's kind of like a Rubik's cube that's been exploded. So when you go inside, as you move to the next room, it rolls over. So think of it like a Rubik's Cube rolling over, okay? So the room that was behind you is now in front of you, and you're now walking on the walls, eventually on the ceiling, because it keeps rolling. So you never run out of. I'm glad you like that, Marcus. I love this house, and I worked with Seaford Surface because he came to the New Media Consortium, and I got to know all these people who I think of as some of our early giants in the field who inspired me for my transition. Well, I better move a little faster on the old time because I'm the moderator too. So that's me in the virtual world the first day, and also at the New Media Consortium's campus when they opened in April 2006. There were only 230,000 accounts total in Second Life at that time, and that's because we had a restriction. You had to have a credit card to have an account. Once they stopped that restriction, the population just skyrocketed. By January of 2009, I think there were over 19 million accounts, in case you're wondering. That's Global Kids in the upper right, and that's the MacArthur Foundation talking to us about digital media and how they wanted to spend money on grants for us. So we had this influx of money and grants and attention and conferences and just this rich orientation. And I did something weird that I'm going to do with you right now. Let's see, do I have money for this? Yep. Okay, let's do a very quick thing. What am I doing on the lower right with my students? Can you tell me in these images? And Yeah, Global Kids, Barry Joseph was amazing. And my arms are folded. In the lower right, I'm holding a cup of coffee and I'm up. The two images on the right, you see myth and truth, and I'm standing there with some students. What are we doing? Yeah, it's supposed to be a cup of coffee. We're supposed to be relaxing, but what am I doing with my students? Okay, I'm giving you the answer there in the chat. Yeah, we're talking. That's it exactly. And we're voting with our feet. It's called a human barometer study. How many of you do it? This is where you ask your students difficult questions, awkward questions. An awkward question would be, gee, it's too bad that the U.S. didn't have a contingency plan for 9/11. That would be an awkward question. I asked that once in class, and 30 people spoke at the same time to tell me about my wrongness. And I loved it, because my goal in a discussion is action, right? I want everyone talking. And I know you're thinking they should all take turns. No, I want them all talking. And guess what I did, Beth? Do you remember? I paid each one of them 10 lindens if they numbered their answers. If they gave me concrete answers and numbered them and they put them in the text chat, I paid them 10 lindens each. And the reason I did is, first off, I needed them to have some money so they could create textures and upload them, right, for their creations. So they had this pride and ownership. They did it themselves. Secondly, I wanted them all to relax and stop fearing the virtual world. When people start talking, yeah, and let's face it, I can afford $1, right? If my students become successful and change the world, it's worth $1. That's pretty much how I was looking at it, right? I was already paying for the regions out of pocket, so $1 for the textures was nothing. Plus, it gave them, they were winning, you see. And even the people who are quiet were typing. And they didn't have to be the first to type it. They just had to number their contributions and put a bunch in there. Yep, that's good. Yeah. I used to also throw $1, one Linden dollar at them, you know, to catch their attention because sometimes they would mute me or block me by accident by hovering over my body and hitting the wrong button. So the only thing I could do to get their attention was to throw money at them because money always talks. Anyway, that's silly, but true. And so I teach, we had this HUD class yesterday and I had to smile. I wanted to put a shout out to Elena and everyone who contributed to the HUD speed build because we were doing that in 2006 as a learning activity for how to get used to creating stuff in World. And I even did it with undergraduate students as well as graduate and doctoral, so I had everyone creating HUDs. And they could weave anything in. They could take all their favorite newspapers, their audiobooks, their whatever, and package them on this HUD so we could all enjoy something. And I was teaching them that this is an integration software. You can integrate content from the web and from all over the place. You of course have to be respectful, of digital rights, not be doing data scraping, and there's certain things we need to do. But and of course, that Mahjong game, if you want a copy of it, let me go back. See that on the right? It does take up 184 prims, but it still works beautifully. I still play it. I played it like a month or two ago. It still works. Don't know if it always will work, but it does. And it's all open source. The scripts are all visible. So this is a great learning tool for students who want to deconstruct and depact and it has the rights in there, the GNU license for this unit. It was constructed in 2004. So if you think that only things that are recent have value, think again, right? And yeah, and this is cooperative. You can play with a friend. Anytime a friend comes close, there's a radar that allows you to add them. And let's say a friend has to leave and a new friend comes up, you can switch them. So I really like that flexibility. That really speaks to me. So let me know if you want a copy. Um, these were some of my giants in the field. They really inspired me. That's VWBPE in 2008. all of us sitting around, you know. I, of course, had black hair back then, and that's me standing there in the upper left with Nick Noakes, who did the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, to SL, excuse me, and Ann Enigma did the autoscript for how we automatically generated scripts. That's Hillary Mason, who's still out there doing groundbreaking work. And the researcher, Brent, he taught research classes, and his students had a research sign above their head, floating text, so everyone in the community knew they were collecting data to be ethical, right? Yes, that's right. And of course, one of the conferences, the Education Support Fair, do you know it had over 4,000 attendees in 1 week from 150 countries? Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is it takes people like you and me to spread the stories, to recruit new educators, to stimulate growth, and to increase the participation in our conferences, our sessions. We are the champions of this world, right? We are the advocates. We're the people who make a difference. Now, my note card tells you all these facts so you can read it. I'm not good with, yeah, I will share a copy of the game there, Phil. Thanks for that message. Um, and it's up to us. Yeah. Now, here's some of the simulations we did at Virtual Harmony in 2008, 9, 10. And when I say we, Andy Stricker did all the work, Spinoza Quinnell. And by the way, he couldn't talk in our talk at 1 o'clock because he got a message saying that the voice channel he was talking over was no longer supported. It was in the 3000s. So somehow a Vivox setting with his version of Firestorm was ceased to work, in case you're wondering. So for those of us who work in open source worlds and with lots of different tools, these are things we have to think about. The bottom game is a special forces game in which we crash a plane and then we look at, and we had several different plane crash simulations. Our later ones was a special forces game. This one here, now that I look, half of the people survived. It was a real crash. Half of them survived, half didn't. And we were analyzing where they were sitting and the fact that crew communications was part of the solution to not crashing in the future, to catching these things. Meanwhile, here's another class. This is Andy Stricker in the lower left. He's teaching virtual world simulation, and his students created models of spaceships and the Star Trek Enterprise. This is sick bay. Others did Greek mythology, and I taught them. I wasn't teaching the class, but I still attended all their classes, and then I ran workshops on the weekends on how to build, how to design, how to animate, how to texture. You got it. How to do sounds. You bet. Well, and that's what's so funny. See, Harvard had come out in the early days in 2006 or so with their River City project by Chris Deedy, and he had mentioned that doctor students who are studying to be a doctor at Harvard only have access to 5 cadavers. That's too small a sample to really be able to do all the procedures hundreds or thousands of times. So they needed better virtual world simulations, not just the physical ones with mannequins that you can program. They needed ways of repeating procedures and assessing failure, as Phil noted, and tracking what success looked like and helping people to build habits that matter. And that's what we were talking about earlier about habits, right? So here's the book thing. I already thumped it. That's myself with Kay, who's presenting tomorrow, I think at 3 o'clock. Um, wonderful, wonderful session on AI and the future and some really amazing stuff. And that's Barbara Truman with me on the right, who passed away in 2021. Because she received the Thinker Award for the 2019, it extended her life. She was so close to death when they awarded that, and it just gave her a new lease on life to fight cancer. And so these places matter. That's Kay and Chris who will be speaking Saturday afternoon at San Diego ISTE. And that's me thinking about graduation. We started offering graduation ceremonies in World for the students who couldn't make it physically on campus because maybe they live somewhere else in the world. That's Dancers Yao at VWBPE. She died. She was a champion for AI safety and for ethics and for United Nations work. And she encouraged me to write two proposals to the future of life. They're the folks who came out with the letter saying maybe we're releasing generative AI too fast without a thoughtful way of training it. Anyway, she asked me to write AI safety proposals, one from the elder voices and United Nations perspective, where we think about what does safety mean to everyone in the world? What does ethics mean? What do values mean? You know, and then she asked for Andy Stricker, myself, and Barbara Truman came up with another proposal for coming up applying the Goldilocks principle. Remember the story Goldilocks and the three bears, where you're trying to figure about what's just right, not too hot, not too cold, but what's just right when it comes to understanding what kinds of choices should we be making and how does an AI system reach these decisions? And then can it be transparent in its decision making process? That's Barbara Truman at the bottom, and that's Cyrus Hush, who you heard from Roxy during her session, from several different speakers, and he was one of our co-authors. And of course, he created a little video for his students at the beginning of term, and then he went out to do some rock climbing, and he fell tragically to his death. And of course, he had created in Chelbo this amazing visual tour of our world here in Second Life, all the different places you could go to. And Yosein Zun just finished curating and updating that because when Cyrus passed away, he hadn't passed on his digital legacy, and his content was no modify, no copy. So I'm on a mission with my students and others to help them set their permissions, uh, understand what should be shared and collaborated, and of course, help strengthen our world. I mourn terribly Cyrus's loss. He was also a co-author on her book and a dear friend. Let's see, here we are. So this is me on the left when I received the Thinker Award. For those of you who have not received it, that's what it looks like. Isn't it amazing? I crocheted a little doily to sit it on top of. And I'm taking a photo so you can see my image in the reflection of it. Well, I was shocked when I received it, Buffy, because I don't think of myself as someone who has changed the world per se. I think of myself as someone who does the work. It's one class at a time, one student at a time, one talk at a time. I'll be giving my 377th keynote address and talk in 2 weeks, representing the Americas on how we make a difference in these worlds. That's my topic. But I still don't think of myself. See, you always see your own frailties, your own what you're not doing. Okay, yeah, yeah, and it keeps us humble. Okay, but on the upper right, that's one of my posters. My 3D posters are always unusual. This one was stimulated by the green robot in the picture, who was one of my graduates. I'm now teaching for him. He's a dean at the school I'm teaching at. The other schools I teach at, I only teach for my students or colleagues who have called me up and said, "We need you. We're in crisis. Come here." In other words, I never applied to teach, not even to my main job for 29 years. It took 2 years before I filled out an application, right? And it's because the dean grabbed me and said, "You must teach. We need someone, and you're the expert. Do it." And I was like, "But I'm so painfully shy. How could I do this? My mouth will close as soon as I walk in the room. I had 30 people who were experts at my subject. I had a guy from IBM who had run a usability lab for 22 years, and I was teaching user interaction design and human factors. And then I looked at him and I thought, how usable are IBM mainframes? And this was 1996, in case you're wondering. The internet was relatively new to the public. I had been on ARPANET since '88, but it was new to everyone else, right? Most of the folks I was working with hadn't spent a lot of time on it. I had run a bulletin board system for 150 Mac callers out of my home in the '80s, right? Um, that was as close as we were getting to communications. for the public. And so when he asked to create a Martian World's Fair and to think about what would it be like if we had all these intergalactic language translators. We had Navi, we had Fairy, we had, of course, two forms of Elven, including the Token Elvish and the Great Company version that keeps you out of court. And then we had Klingon, of course. We just had so much fun. And I created this fanciful, it's supposed to be like an agricultural barn, but space style, right? With the planets going around. I know the planets are cheesy, Phil. Work with me here. And and all these crazy plants that wouldn't exist on Mars at all. But and other forms of life that are not humanoid. And this notion that we all come together and we have this 4-H fair kind of experience. What a marvelous place. Because of VWBPE, we can do these things, right? Well, our world's not complete without mentioning Thinker Selby, who's the reason we have a Thinker Award. Not just VWPP coming up with it, but him being our inspiration. And of course, his exhibits and the wonderful exhibits from our sponsors. EduNation was one of my first homes in the virtual world. I would go there and dance to the music videos. I was a webhead because I love languages and culture, and they were a Yahoo group that brought me closer to EduNation, and of course, connecting with all of you. And I love design thinking, and the virtual world is perfect for it. We can design games, simulations, experiences, and then think about why they matter. This notion of explore, imagine, and create and then coming up with something, even if it looks crude, even if it looks strange. And then here's the money shot, okay? How many of you have read Hoffman and Novak's paper from 2009 where they talk about the flow model and they did a meta study of 12 papers, including their own, and then they thought about addiction? Because I'm always being told, oh, you're so addicted. You moved into the virtual world, you transitioned. I only have 4 minutes. And then you took 57 classes or 56 in 5 weeks to learn how to build and animate and texture and a script and all this stuff. It was like a sucking sound was heard in the universe and with a pop at the end. And that was me being absorbed through my transition into the virtual world. And I loved it. The reason this thing is important, and I use this in my classes, is to recognize that while I want my students to be in world and to do great things, I don't want them to forget about life, and I want them to stay anchored and focused, to have meaningful work. So here are students from St. Martin's University. They asked me to teach VR, and I said sure. And of course, my doctoral work was in building VR labs and studying new interface paradigms for making them easier to use and figuring out how to get them comfortable for people, which is a great hardship. So I had them create content in a virtual world because everyone could do it and they could see it. And then I talked about the difficulties of porting that content into VR because we had just done it. We had created our first app, and and we had taken one of our virtual world simulations and put it in VR, and all the changes we had to do to make that uh, um, an Oculus Meta app. So it was, and of course they're doing the hypergrid, Roxy. So I have all kinds of students who are doing field trips and going and getting content from the Lanny Mall, from the space. It's a dune sim, with amazing content. And of course, I was inspired by Richard Millwood. How many of you know Richard Millwood? You're using, you're benefiting from his research, okay? He built this amazing thing, and those are my students and myself testing their cyber range, by the way. Let me show it to you. This is a larger, and of course I have links and stuff to it. He looks at a lot of theorists. So the disciplines are the gold, the inner circle. The next circle are the giants in the field. And I'm always telling my students, I need to know who are the movers and shakers who have framed the thoughts, that the seminal works that are the foundation of our thought. Even if things change later, we have to know how our field has evolved. And then their major theories and in blues and greens and how they applied them in different ways. And then in white, how it's practiced. Now, he doesn't really have cognitive apprenticeship here, but he has constructivism coming off of Vygotsky. And I learned so much about how people learn by studying Richard's dissertation, which is online. And it's a wonderful example of how he makes it come to life. Well, this is my last slide. The good news is we made it to the end. We've transitioned. And here I am. I am so assimilated that I'm in OpenSim with multiple accounts testing student work with 2 Lears, okay? Because, here I have 9 different accounts, and I will test with 8 of them, and I will even test with non-graphical interfaces, browsers that are not graphical in World to get a sense of different experiences. Yep, we're all working hard, and I'm testing different games and different stuff, by the way. This happens to be a ransomware game that's on screen. But we had all kinds. We even had browser-based where we got media on a prim to actually allow us to play a browser-based game, a side scroller, um, that had a lot of learning benefits in our cyber range. And I just love the connectivism. So, on this note, I want to thank you and thank everyone at VWBPE for making this amazing conference. I want to thank Phil and the Science Circle and everyone there for your amazing contributions. I kept looking at the announcements of all the space program coolness you were doing, and of course, I was moaning because you must realize the first time I went to the International Space Museum, I was entranced by the fact that the planets were talking about who last visited them. That wonderful perspective of shifting the energy. And when we go to our science events and we shift the energy and we think of the world in such different ways, it's magical. So I want to thank everyone. And that's the end of my talk. Transition well and welcome to the world. Thank you. Oh, my staff, my Saturn on a Stick, is an AO that allows you to walk like Gandalf. I created it with Dr. Fran's instructions in 2006 or 7, 2007 when I held a benefit for cancer. And